I didn't start this experiment because I was sick. That's the strange part. I felt fine, normal, but somewhere between late nights, heavy meals, and that constant background fatigue I couldn't explain, I realized fine had quietly become my baseline. Not energized, not sharp, just functional, and that bothered me. So when I kept hearing whispers about clove water, nothing flashy, no miracle claims, just quiet stories about digestion, inflammation, oral health, I decided to try it. No expectations, no detox fantasy, just 7 days, one small habit added to an otherwise unchanged routine. Every morning, before coffee, before my phone, I soaked 2 cloves in warm water and drank it slowly. The taste was subtle but unmistakable, warm, slightly bitter, almost medicinal. It didn't feel indulgent, it felt intentional, like something ancient, like my body recognized it before my brain did. Day 1 passed without fireworks, no surge of energy, no dramatic shift, but something strange happened later that night. After dinner, I waited for the usual heaviness, the bloating, the sluggish drag that normally followed me to bed. It never came. My stomach felt quiet, not empty, just calm, as if the background noise I'd grown used to had been turned down a notch. I told myself it was coincidence. On day 2, I noticed my mouth felt different, cleaner, not minty, not artificially fresh, just neutral, balanced. I caught myself running my tongue along my teeth without realizing it. The faint irritation I usually ignored, especially in the mornings, was gone. Still, I stayed skeptical. Placebo is powerful. The brain loves patterns. I reminded myself of that. But by the 3rd morning, something deeper began to shift. It wasn't about digestion anymore. It was about how I felt inside my own body, lighter, clearer, like small systems were syncing up quietly, without asking for attention. And that's when I realized this wasn't going to be one of those experiments you forget about. Something had started. By the 4th morning, the ritual had become automatic. Heat the water, drop in the cloves, wait, drink. It no longer felt like an experiment, it felt like a signal I was sending to my body before the chaos of the day began. And my body, strangely, was answering back. The change showed up first in my energy, but not the loud kind people chase. No caffeine spike, no jittery alertness. It was steadier than that. I noticed I wasn't crashing mid-morning the way I usually did. The fog that normally settled behind my eyes around 11 a.m. just didn't arrive. Thoughts felt more linear. Tasks took less effort to start. Cloves contain compounds known to influence inflammation and blood sugar regulation, but reading about that later didn't capture what it felt like in real time. What I experienced was subtle alignment, as if my body wasn't fighting itself as much. Around this time, my digestion continued to surprise me. Meals moved through me differently. There was less pressure, less fermentation, less of that tight, stretched feeling that makes you unbutton your pants and pretend everything's fine. I hadn't changed what I was eating, same foods, same portions, but my body seemed to be extracting what it needed with less resistance. That night, something unexpected happened. I slept deeper, not longer, deeper. I didn't toss. I didn't wake up to check the clock. When morning came, it felt abrupt, like I'd been pulled out of something dense and restorative. Sleep quality is tied closely to inflammation and gut health. That's not speculation, that's physiology. And for the first time, those abstract ideas felt tangible. By day 5, I stopped looking for changes and started noticing absences. The absence of heaviness, the absence of irritation, the absence of that constant low-level discomfort I had normalized for years. That's when a quiet question crept in. What else had I been living with, that I didn't have to? And the body, once again, stayed silent but continued doing its work. By the 6th day, the changes had moved past the obvious and into territory that's harder to describe but impossible to ignore. My body felt less reactive. Little things that normally irritated me, noise, delays, minor stress, just didn't hook into me the same way. There was more space between stimulus and response, like my nervous system had taken a slow, deliberate breath. This wasn't emotional numbness, it was regulation. Cloves are rich in compounds like eugenol, known for their antioxidant and antimicrobial effects. In controlled amounts, they interact with inflammation pathways in gut bacteria, and the gut, quietly, is one of the loudest conductors of mood and stress. When it's irritated, everything else follows. When it calms down, the whole system softens. That afternoon, I noticed something else. My appetite felt more honest. I was hungry when I needed food, satisfied when I'd had enough. No restless snacking, no craving-driven detours, just clear signals. It felt like my body had turned the volume back up on cues I'd drowned out for years. Even my skin seemed to reflect the internal shift. Not dramatically, no overnight glow, but there was a steadiness to it, less puffiness around the eyes, less dullness. Inflammation doesn't always announce itself with pain. Sometimes it shows up as subtle swelling, muted color, a tired reflection you don't recognize as a symptom. That evening, as I prepared the water for the next morning, it hit me how small this habit was. 2 cloves, warm water, that was it. No powders, no protocols, no aggressive intervention. And yet, my body was responding as if it had been waiting for something like this, something gentle enough not to trigger resistance, but consistent enough to matter. By now, I wasn't wondering if something was happening, I was wondering how deep it could go. Day 7 arrived quietly, no anticipation, no hype, just the same warm cup in my hands, the same slow sips, but my awareness had changed. I was paying attention now, not searching for effects, but noticing how my body held itself. The first thing I became aware of was how light my mornings felt. Not rushed, not heavy. My stomach didn't clench when I stood up. There was no stiffness, no subtle resistance as my body transitioned from rest to movement. It was as if the internal gears had already been lubricated before the day even began. Later that morning, I realized I hadn't thought about my digestion at all. That might sound insignificant, but it isn't. When something works properly, it becomes invisible. The gut, when balanced, doesn't demand attention. It just does its job, and for the first time in a long while, mine felt cooperative instead of temperamental. As the day went on, I noticed my breath felt deeper, not forced, not intentional, just fuller. There's a physiological link between reduced inflammation and how freely the diaphragm moves. But again, this wasn't an idea, it was a sensation, like my chest had a little more room than it used to. Even my joints felt different, subtle, less creaky, less stiff when standing after sitting too long. Cloves have long been studied for their role in modulating inflammatory markers, and while they're not painkillers, they seem to influence the environment in which inflammation thrives, and that environment, I was realizing, affects everything. By the evening, I felt grounded in my body in a way that's hard to manufacture, not stimulated, not sedated, just settled, as if my systems were communicating clearly instead of talking over each other. It wasn't dramatic, but it was profound. And then, unexpectedly, something emotional surfaced, not excitement, not disbelief, but a quiet sense of respect. Respect for how responsive the body can be when you stop overwhelming it and start supporting it. As night fell on the 7th day, I reflected on the subtle symphony that had been quietly orchestrating itself inside me. It wasn't like flipping a switch, it was more like tuning an instrument that had long been ignored. Every system, every process, every cellular rhythm had settled into something unexpectedly harmonious. I ran my hands along my forearms and noticed a faint tingling, a gentle reminder of circulation, of blood moving without obstruction. That tingling wasn't dramatic, but it was intimate, a whisper from the body that things were finally flowing as they were meant to. Clove compounds, like eugenol, interact with blood vessels in subtle ways, supporting circulation and reducing microinflammation. You don't feel the chemistry in a textbook sense, you feel life happening in a smoother, quieter way. Later, as I moved through my evening, my senses felt subtly sharper, flavors were cleaner, smells were more distinct, sounds slightly crisper. Perhaps it was the gut-brain axis adjusting, perhaps it was the reduction of low-grade inflammation throughout the body, or maybe it was the combination of ritual, attention, and consistency. Whatever the mechanism, my perception of reality felt a touch brighter, more immediate. Even my posture carried a difference. Shoulders didn't slump as easily, my back felt less rigid. Tiny tensions I had accepted as normal for years simply weren't there anymore. I realized how much of everyday fatigue and discomfort is not dramatic, but cumulative, a slow weight pressed into your muscles, joints, and organs, and now, that weight had eased. As I prepared to sleep that night, I lay back and noticed my heartbeat, calm, regular, satisfying in its quiet persistence. The body, usually a background hum, had stepped forward into awareness, not screaming for attention, but present, steady, alive, and for the first time in a long time, I felt truly aligned with myself. Morning came again, but it was different this time. The ritual, the simple act of drinking clove water, felt almost ceremonial. 7 days had passed, but the impact felt as if it had been building quietly for years, not just a week. My body no longer felt like a machine I was struggling to maintain. It felt like a finely tuned instrument, responsive, resilient, and aware. I noticed my movements were more fluid, almost effortless. Each step carried a sense of stability, my balance more intuitive. My breathing remained deep and unforced, a rhythm I hadn't realized I had been shortchanging all these years. Even my thoughts had weight but not drag, clarity without harshness, sharpness without stress. The mind-body connection, often spoken of in vague terms, suddenly felt tangible. As I prepared breakfast, the flavors of food struck me differently. The crunch of a fresh carrot, the subtle sweetness of a ripe fruit, they weren't just tastes, they were signals that my digestive system had quietly recalibrated itself, ready to absorb nutrients efficiently, without protest or sluggishness. Cloves are known for antimicrobial and antioxidant properties, and while I had approached this as a small experiment, I could feel the cumulative effects: a body less burdened, more capable, more awake. By midday, I realized my skin had a subtle glow, not exaggerated or unnatural, but a reflection of the internal balance I had been ignoring. My energy, consistent and calm, no longer came in peaks and valleys but as a steady hum of vitality. Small inflammations I had once taken for granted, minor bloating, mild joint stiffness, constant low-level fatigue had faded into absence. Sitting quietly, I understood something fundamental. Health isn't about dramatic shifts or instant miracles. It's about giving the body what it needs, consistently, with patience. 7 days of clove water had not fixed me. It had reminded me how responsive and intelligent my body truly is, how it rewards attention, care, and gentle persistence. And as the day closed, I felt it in my chest, my limbs, my mind, a profound sense of alignment and respect for the life running quietly within me. Something small, simple, and natural had changed everything.